of applause. How many of you have ever seen the movie Up from 2009? A lot of people, all right, cool. It's hard to believe that was 11 years ago already. But it's a fun movie once you get past the opening scene, which is the most depressing scene of all times. Oh my gosh. I was lucky. I actually went to go get a refill of popcorn because that's how my family gets down. We're done with the popcorn before the opening scene is even done. So I came back and I could see, you know how when you're walking back to like your friends or your family, the lights shining on their faces from the screen? My family's like weeping. 2 minutes and it was like, what happened? Did something real happen in the theater? Was there a fight? Did someone have I didn't know what was going on. And they were like, you're so glad you missed it. Like, what happened? It was awful. So anyways, just watch that. Maybe buzz through the beginning a little bit and then it gets really good. But I love the dog. His name is Doug. And if you think you hear an O in there, you're incorrect. It is D-U-G, Doug the dog. And the movie has these two main characters that we saw there with the older guy and the younger kid, Carl and Russell. And they find this golden retriever named Doug. And he has a special collar that helps him speak to humans. And so humans can understand him. So Doug introduces himself to his new human friends. And he says, hi, my name is Doug. And in typical dog fashion, I have just met you, and I love you, just this loyal dog. And so he starts talking about his master and how his master is good and smart. And he made this collar so that he could communicate with a squirrel. And he's just gone. He's just gone. Like, what happened right there? And when we watched the movie for the first time in the theater in 2009, as I was licking fake butter off my fingers, I was like, that's classic. That's funny. And they used the gag through the whole film. It happens like 3-4 times. And later on, there's the bad guy dogs, like Alpha. The Alpha dog is his name. And he has a henchman named Beta and Data. And they're laughing at their leader and about the sound of his voice because his collar notch got turned to like a high pitch. And Alpha dog basically says to them, Beta, Data, mayhaps you squirrel. And then eventually you get back to the film. And you're like, it's so classic. It doesn't get old because it's a true story. Like, dogs are so distracted by many things, but near the top of the list or at the top of the list are squirrels, right? And so they're just absolutely gone. Now, how many of you have at least one dog at home by round of applause? Okay, we got dog lovers here. I like it. So yeah, but just on the count of 3, yell out one of your dog's names. 1, 2, 3. Awesome. I love that dog. Okay. So yeah, I know lots of dogs at Momentum, Leo and Dallas, and we have, it's well documented. You've had to hear about it several times. But 3 years ago this month, January 19th, 2017, we got our first dog. And secretly, me and my wife Shannon have been talking about, like, I think I'm open to it. How about you? I'd be open to it. Shh, don't tell the kids. We have to be 100% sure, or they will rebel and freak out on us. If we're like, hey, I think we're going to get a dog, then we don't get one. So finally, the day came, and we got a dog. He's a rescue. He's a boxer mix, and this is so him right here. This is so him. Because he's a boxer mix. We rescued him from Madison County, just west of Columbus. I mean, we drove a couple of hours just to get this dog because we saw on his online profile, we swiped the right direction. We were like, hey, you're our dog, And so we drive there, we get him. And this is such a great summary of him because he's just such a buddy. He's like rippling with muscles up here. He's like, what's up? Come get some. Okay? What's up? And then down here, like this true character. But I do have a ball. We could play fetch. I just met you, but I love you. And so he just immediately, we all love him. I'm so glad we waited a while to get a dog because every one of us in our family just loves Sully. His full name is Sully O'Sullivan. When we take him someplace and check him in, he has to be Sully Smith. But his real name, he's Irish if you can't tell, Sully O'Sullivan. And so anyways, there are 2 things that just make him lose his mind. 2 things that are distractions, well documented again at Momentum, and that is one is men. Men make him lose his mind. He looks out our front window and has ruined our couch. Anyone in our Mo group knows. He's ruined our couch because if he sees a human being with a Y chromosome anywhere within a quarter mile, He loses his mind. He goes full on Cujo. There's saliva all over our front window. He's frothing at the mouth, and he goes crazy. If you are a man and you have a beard, or you wear a hat, or you are standing, oh my gosh, he's livid. He hates it with all of his heart. You're like, settle down, Bob Barker. Just chill out. Then the second thing that is such a distraction to him is anytime he sees or thinks that he might see a squirrel, he's gone. He's absolutely gone. And so he's like, please, let me go out. There's a squirrel. I see a squirrel. And he goes to the window or the back door, and he just whines like a baby. Please let me go out and kill it and make a scarf out of its tail. Please, I just want that squirrel. And he's just dying to get out there. And so he just sees a squirrel and he loses his mind. He goes hawk smash, just goes nuts. Well, our 14-year-old daughter, she has this game that she plays to mess with his mind. Usually she loves him. She's great with him. But she messes with his mind sometimes. And she looks out the window and fakes him out just by saying, oh, squirrel, squirrel, what's that? What's there? And the dog runs, just gets up from a nap or whatever puzzle he's working at the moment, runs to the window, looks out the window, and she says, squirrel, squirrel. And then she runs to the other side of the house, to a different window or door. Oh, squirrel. And he runs to that direction. And she just goes, well, we got a video of it. Here's a short video. This is Aslan, my daughter, with Sullivan about a year ago.
Sully, it's a squirrel! It's a squirrel! Sully, it's a squirrel! It's a squirrel! It's a squirrel! Squirrel! It's a squirrel!
He could do it all day. Like, she would get tired before he would get tired. He's like, did you see these muscles? Remember? He's like, I do this all day, sister. And so he is just like that. He's all over the place, just full on. And so all the time, we're just like, what's that? What's there? Squirrel. And even, this is no joke, when I was working on this message in December, or when I had a phone call about things we were doing with the series, sometimes I'd be reading through my manuscript, writing out, and I'd be like, okay, so like I'll talk about Doug the dog, and I'll be like, yeah, when he meets them, he's talking, and he's like, squirrel. And he would hear me from the other room. I mean, no joke, it was a whisper, almost indecipherable at times. And I would say to myself, like an insane person, talking to myself, like, squirrel. And he would, from his dog bed, and he would walk. I was like, no, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to trick you right now. And he'd come to the door right next to me, look out. I'm sorry, but there's no squirrel. Huh? You know, just classic. It's just absolutely no joke. So whenever there's a squirrel, or the hint of a squirrel, or the hope, or the suggestion of a squirrel, he just, boom, he is just to the window, to the door. So our theme for a short 3-week sermon series here at the beginning of January is very simple. The sermon series is called Squirrel. And that's what we're going to be talking about this week and the next 2 weeks. Squirrels, metaphorically, are distractions. They're furry little things that steal our focus, okay? Like, I just can't stay focused because there's a squirrel in my life that whenever it pops up, I'm gone. I'm headed in that direction. So a squirrel is something that takes our eyes off of what we should be looking at and stuff that we should be doing. They're harmful diversions that lead us away from where we should be walking. Now, when we take Sully for a walk, he usually is pretty darn good on a walk. He annoys me that he wants to smell everything. Okay, just come on already. On the way back, he's fine because he's like, I smelled it all, okay? But on the way there, wherever we're walking, he just smells everything. The only time he's bad when he's walking is when he sees a squirrel. He goes nuts. So a squirrel is something that is a harmful diversion that leads us away, leads us into traffic even, if you will, from where we should be walking. So a squirrel, for you, it could be a possession. It could be a thought, like this obsession, this thing you can't stop thinking about. It could be a person. It could be an insecurity. But it represents this fuzzy little distraction, this thing that steals your focus, and you have trouble resisting, and you want to chase it. What's that? What's there? Squirrel! You know, you want to go after the thing. So in Mark chapter 12, what my buddy David Holly Jr. just read up here a few moments ago, Mark chapter 12, there's this really central story about Jesus. And there's this guy who asks him, what is the most important commandment of all time? Now, in the Jewish culture, where this is being discussed in the first century, the Jews had, within the first 5 books of our Bible, the Pentateuch or the Torah, there were 613 commands that the Jews had isolated and said, okay, there are 613 commands in those first 5 books, the Pentateuch, the Torah. And so this guy's asking him, of the 613, which is the most important? Like, basically, what's humanity's purpose? What should we focus on as the creatures of the Almighty God? What's our collective why? What is it that we should be pointing toward? What's the main thing? If the main thing is to keep the main thing, then what is the main thing? And so Jesus responds basically by saying, okay, I can't give you just one, because there's 2 that are so closely linked. I can't bring up the one without bringing up the close second. And I always say it like this. It's kind of like conjoined twins at birth, that they're just so conjoined, and those like really important organs and stuff sometimes joined at the head. Like you're like, man, I can't separate these 2 conjoined twins or I would kill them both. They're that closely linked. And so he says those top 2 commandments, the great commandments, Christians call it, love God, love people. Love God with everything inside of you and love your neighbor as yourself. And I can't separate these 2. If you pretend you love God, but there are certain people, certain races you don't like, or political parties, or they like this kind of music or whatever, like you can't claim to love God if you hate people. Like these are too closely linked. They're connected, they're conjoined. And so basically Jesus says, God has created you for relationships. A relationship with God and a relationship with others around you. Love God, love people. Then Jesus also, before he left his disciples, his students, his apprentices, before he left his disciples, he said, I want you to go make disciples of all nations. And that's called the Great Commandment, or the Great Commission. So you got the 2 great commandments and the Great Commission. And these are 2 of the central teachings of Jesus. Really just the brass tacks, the down to the nuts and bolts basics. So Jesus gives us the Great Commandments and the Great Commission. And that's our main purpose, our why for life. God's like, you can come up with all kinds of things to be distracted by and to distract yourself with, but this is why you were created, to love God with everything inside of you and to love people and to go make disciples of Jesus. Hey, disciples, go make disciples. So to make disciples who make disciples. Now, I just want to pause for a second. To have that kind of focus in life, can you imagine what that would feel like? Like, I know there's people sprinkled throughout the room that this is trite. This is like, yeah, I totally get that. I know what that picture looks like. But for some of you, this is what you long for, is to say, I could walk through each day knowing I have peace with God. Like, I could have peace with others. That doesn't mean that I'm friends with everyone. It just means that no matter what turmoil is no matter how somebody might be mad at me, this or there, but I can have peace with God, and I can do everything in my power to have peace with others. Or to know that you are focused on the right stuff in this life. So many of us would love to say, man, I know, I'm confident. That doesn't mean you're perfect. It means I'm headed the right direction. I'm focused on the right things. And I might stumble along the way, but I'm focused on the right things. Love God, love people, make disciples who make disciples. Can you imagine what it would feel like to baptize a friend into Christ? To baptize a family member, to dunk them in water as a symbol of, I die to myself, and I'm going to rise to walk a new life committed to Jesus as my number one. Can you imagine what it would be like to baptize because you've been a godly, encouraging father, or because you've been a godly, encouraging friend? You don't have all the answers, but you played a role. Can you imagine what it would be like to have somebody, one person, or 11 people in your life that one day would look back and say, that person, I know Jesus paid the price for my sins on the cross and all that, but if it weren't for this person, you, I wouldn't know about the importance of Jesus dying on the cross, rising from the dead. You might not know the importance right now. You might be like, I don't get that. But to have people say, it's because of this person, the spiritual impact, not just positive impact, not just they helped me learn to read, not just things like that, they helped me not be lonely. They had a spiritual impact in my life. And I don't think I would be in heaven if it weren't for that person. Can you imagine what that would feel like to have joy and happiness in this world and to say at the end of your year, Happy New Year, at the end of your decade, Happy New Decade, the end of your life, no regrets. Like, I know I wasn't perfect, but I focused on the right things. My life wasn't just about running marathons or doing this, that, or the other. It was love God, love people, make disciples who make disciples. And at the end of your life to be able to say, man, no regrets, God. I know I wasn't perfect. No regrets, though. I focused on Jesus. He's forgiven me for my sins. And I focused on him. I tried to chase him. And here's the vision. Every one of us in this room could go to bed tonight with that peace. Every one of us could lay down our heads on our pillows and say, man, I am going to follow Jesus. 100% is my number one. I'm going to lay my head on my pillow and say, you know what? I'm going to chase Jesus. I'm going to give my life to Christ. I'm going to love God, love people, make disciples who make disciples. I mean, wouldn't that feel great to be like, man, this is a new beginning, and I won't be perfect, but I'm focused on the right stuff, the stuff that Jesus said I was created for. Now, my job today is very simple. You might be like, your job is always simple, Dan, shut up. My job today is very simple. I got two things. One is to define the metaphor of squirrel. Squirrel's a distraction, fuzzy little thing that steals your focus. Now, the other thing is this. I want to get you wrestling with this question. This is between you and God. I'm not trying to guilt trip you. I'm not trying to say I know what your thing is. But your question, what is your squirrel? Now, you might have several. I mean, some of us are really vulnerable, transparent people like, man, I got several. Well, if you can think of what they are, that's great. But some of you might be like, I think my main squirrel is this. Or, man, I got two or three that come to mind right away. And if you don't know what they are, if you need help, some people are like, I know right away. You don't have to tell me. But other people might say, I need some clues. Let me give you some clues. This might be a clue to help you figure out what your squirrels are. Here's one question. Why aren't you at church every Sunday? You said you weren't going to guilt trip me. No, this is between you and God. This is between you and God. Why aren't you at church every Sunday? And whatever it is that keeps you from being at church might, maybe not, but it might be a hint or a clue as to what is your squirrel. Because this is the first Sunday of the year. We're all going to do it right this year, right? We're all going to do it right, man. It's going to be new me, new year, hashtag this, hashtag that. It's going to be all that. But after the first Sunday of the year, there's a few more seats available in this new seating, arrangement, right? And that's just because, okay, I got to think about what's that distraction? What are the things that keep me from getting to church every Sunday? Because I grow more spiritually when I'm learning about God's word and I'm worshiping with people and I'm being encouraged by others and I have positive spiritual influences in my life. Another one, what are the distractions, the squirrels that sponge up my time so that I don't spend time with God daily? Think of the daily peace I'd have just reading a short chunk of scripture, starting in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, the stories, the life and teachings of Jesus. What if I just read a little bit of that every day and then talked to God for a short time just to kick my day off? What are the things that sponge up your time so that you don't do that? Or why aren't you deeply connected with people in a Mo group? Okay, just ask that. What is it that keeps me from doing that? It might be a hint to your squirrel. You might be like, okay, I am in a Mo group, but the truth is I'm not deeply connected to those people. I'm guarding myself from people. I'm not being vulnerable. I'm not letting anyone actually in at all. And so what is that? Or if you're a student, why aren't you at Unleashed every Sunday, which is like your Mo group? Why aren't you at Unleashed every Sunday? Or another one, maybe why aren't you using your time, treasure, and talents to advance God's kingdom? Why aren't you using those things for God and for his ultimate purposes? And so you might kind of kick those around and be like, man, some of those questions might lead me as hints and clues as to what my squirrels are. So what are the things or who are the people that pull you in the opposite direction of your purpose, your God-given purpose in life to love God, love people, and make disciples, apprentices of Jesus who make disciples. What are those things that are like, oh, what's that? What's there? Squirrel! And you're gone because of those particular things. Now, there might be things that are competing for your attention that are things like, maybe it's a friend, a bad influence, or maybe it's a group of friends, or maybe it's a group of teammates. They're like, man, that is the influence. That's the distraction. Like if I'm focused on God and Jesus, that's the distraction. Right there is this friend. And I'm going to be honest, that friend might be here at Momentum. It's not like everyone at Momentum is a great positive influence. There's all kinds of people coming and searching, all kinds of people with their own stuff. But there might be somebody at Momentum, you're like, that person is the one that I need to distance myself from because that takes away my focus from God. So maybe it's a person, or maybe it's the hatred you're harboring about some past hurt or pain, and it stands between you and God. And you're like, man, because of this pain, I don't want to take any risks in life, any risks with people. And you're like, man, that is the thing that's become the distraction to keep me from loving God and loving people. Or maybe it's a secret struggle with addiction. It could be to alcohol or pills or pornography, and maybe you have or haven't let someone in on that struggle, just one person. Can you pray for me? Can I call you when I'm tempted? Whatever it is, maybe that's your squirrel. I've had people tell me, again, this is not me imposing this on them, because I don't know everyone's story at Momentum, and I don't know what people struggle with. Sometimes I do. But I've had multiple people, at least two that I can think of, tell me that their squirrel was their camper. That's weird, isn't it? But they've basically said, there's so little warm time in Northeast Ohio, right? There's so little warm time that as soon as it gets warm, as soon as I'm not walking around in long underwear, as soon as that happens, I'm gone for the weekend. We get our camper, we go disappear, and we're gone every weekend, and eventually we lose that community we've had with people because they never see us. And we don't serve people or invest in others. We don't serve at church. All this stuff goes down. And then by the time it starts getting cold again, then we're like, hey, we show up and we're like, man, we're strangers. Like all the spiritual progress we made and all the ways that we were investing in and being invested in by others, it disappeared. And I've had other people tell me, man, our camper, like it's not like going camping is wrong, but we just got to prioritize better and not run to that all the time. Maybe it's a romantic relationship. Now, I'm not a sexist. You can ask my wife. You can ask many people around me. But this is kind of a girl sin that her and I have seen over the years. And that is this. There are girls who love God. There are ladies who love God. There are women who love God who are like, man, I would love to have a relationship with a dude. But the wrong dude pops up. And I'm not saying he's a mean guy, walks around like shoving people, chest shove, what's up, It could be a super nice guy, but he's not headed the same spiritual direction as you. He is not focused on love God, love people, make disciples who make disciples. And she's a follower of Jesus. And sometimes because there's a tension from a guy, she's like, I don't have the patience to wait on the right guy. I don't have the patience to wait on that. So I'll take him because he's showing me some attention. He's giving me what I want. And so, squirrel, she goes off into this relationship with him. And we've seen it so many times. She gives up Jesus for a dude. And a year later, they've broken up a long time ago, a full year later. But she never comes back around to Jesus sometimes. It's like, okay, I have this relationship. I find out, yep, we weren't headed the same spiritual direction. It doesn't even work out. But now I'm not headed a spiritual direction either. And she's given up Jesus and her number one things that she should be focusing on for a guy. Or maybe it's the relationship that you want. Like, man, I want a relationship. And that's all that you're focused on and all that you're chasing after. And that becomes a squirrel. I don't know if you've ever seen the film Interstellar. I used to not like Matthew McConaughey when all he did was romantic comedies. Now, dude, he plays some boss roles, and every once in a while he puts on a shirt. It's crazy. It's crazy. So he's just in some great movies, but he was in Interstellar. I love sci-fi films. And the setting is mid-21st century. So not far from now, but the setting is, a world now in the 21st century, mid-21st century, where there's ravaged crops and dust storms that threaten human survival. Corn is the last crop in existence. Everything else has disappeared. And everything because of that is really back to basic and simple. And there's this really cool scene where Matthew McConaughey's character, his name's Joseph Cooper, but they call him Coop in the film. He's sitting on a farmhouse front porch with his father-in-law, whose name in the film is Donald. And they're talking, and Donald says this, and it's this great picture where they look backwards in time for them, but they're looking at our era right now. And Donald, the father-in-law, says this. He says, when I was a kid, I felt like they made something new every day, some gadget or idea. Like every day was Christmas. But 6 billion people, just try to imagine that, he says, and every last one of them trying to have it all. This world isn't so bad. And it's this great picture of saying, man, it's almost like we have to go into the future and have these pretend people in the future look back at our time to see what our besetting sin is. To be like, yeah, one day in the future, people are going to look back on us and probably be like, man, they were so obsessed with having it all. Like gadgets, thing to put their face in all the time, something to show a video of the person at the front door, a brand new car to lease, well, let's upgrade it to another year. Man, that SUV looks sweet. Just like constantly working on what's the next thing, and this desire to have it all. Maybe your squirrel is a gadget. Maybe your squirrel is that constant pursuit of the next sweet thing, the next shirt, the next sweater that doesn't have dog hair on it, all that kind of, just constantly new squirrel. And here's the tough part. Squirrels all aren't inherently evil. That's really important to understand spiritually. Squirrels aren't all inherently evil things. Some of them are completely neutral, but they're a distraction and they're bad priorities. Like to put them at the top or to put them where they would compete with our attention for God and loving people and making disciples who make disciples. Video games are not evil. I enjoy a video game sometime to chill out and relax. It's okay to play video games, but if you let that creep up and just soak so much of your time, or travel baseball, that's not an evil thing. But if it becomes too high of a priority, for some of you, you could say your job. You need a job, right? Okay, some jobs are very demanding, but you know what I mean when sometimes there's an overcommitment to a good or neutral thing, and it keeps you from focusing on the best things. Sometimes you need a bigger why to say no to some of these other distractions in your life, and Jesus gives you the why. Love God with everything you have. Love people. Love your neighbors, yourself, and make disciples who make disciples. I remember one time in Northern Virginia, we lived in the D.C. suburbs, and our Mo group, the equivalent of a Mo group for us there, we were out to have dinner at Ruby Tuesdays, and there was this girl, she was a young 20-something, cute girl who was lonely, and she wasn't growing spiritually. She would have been the first to tell you. She was like spiritually immature. She didn't know much about what it meant to have a relationship with God. And I remember sitting around a dinner table at Ruby Tuesdays with all of her friends and her, and she had come for a rare appearance, and we were talking. I remember her saying, man, I want to get involved in a Mo group. I really want to. Like, I'm lonely and I want to grow spiritually. I want to get involved in a Mo group, but I just don't know how to find the time because I barely have enough time to get to the gym every day. And it was like, man, that's a good priority, right? It's a healthy priority to want to work out every day. That's a priority I have. I want to work out every day. But to not realize when you've made that a priority over the purpose that you exist, to love God and love people and make disciples who make disciples, that I think sometimes, New Year rant, most of us come up with our first resolutions are like, man, it's got to be something about diet and fitness, right? It's got to be diet and fitness because they're good things. They're not bad things, obviously. Like you want to take care of your body that God gave you, okay? So that's a good thing. But when you put it as the priority, the main thing, or sometimes you're just like, I'm going to make that a priority to distract myself from the actual things in life that I should focus on. I need to submit to God. Like I need to love God and love people. And if you post something about diet and fitness and nutrition, you're going to get likes, right? No one's going to be like, well, that's a distraction for you. Deleted, shut up, blocked, snoozed, right? Like all that stuff. But for some of us, it's a major squirrel because we're like, hey, I can feel good about myself and focus on that for 14 days. I can really feel good about that because it's something and it's good and it's positive. But it's not the highest priority. It shouldn't be the highest priority. In C.S. Lewis's book, The Screwtape Letters, there's a demon writing letters to another demon. He's tempting him how to tempt. He's teaching him how to tempt. And there's this one letter that he writes that's about being in love and whether that's a good or a bad thing. And this demon, whose name is Screwtape, writes this: leave humans to discuss whether love or patriotism or celibacy or candles on an altar or total abstinence from alcohol or education are good or bad. Leave that to the humans to discuss that, he says. Can't you see there is no answer? Nothing matters at all except the tendency of a given state of mind to move a particular person at a particular moment nearer to God or nearer to the devil. So basically he's saying there's a ton of things that we can argue about, whether they're good or bad. Some of you are going to spend all of 2020 arguing about it until November, right? Oh, there's people on the other side. They suck. They're stupid. They don't get it. Hey, those guys over there, they suck. They're stupid. They don't get it. We're all right, okay? So, like, man, is it good or is it bad? Well, some of those things, there's not an answer to that. They're neutral things. The main thing is during those moments where you're fighting for your political party with all words you have, during that time, are you moving closer to love God and love others? Or are you moving further? And if you're moving further, squirrel! That's a squirrel. It's a distraction from the main thing. Politics is another big distraction from the main thing. If it moves you away from loving God and loving others, oh man, am I allowed to say screw it? I mean, if it keeps you from loving God and loving others, then it's a distraction. Squirrel. It's a bad thing for you because it's a distraction. So all that matters is if your zeal for your country, your patriotism, does it move you closer to Jesus or further away? It could do either. Your zeal for social justice, does it move you closer to Jesus or further away? It could do either. But what does it do for you? What are you, that person you're in love with, is that good or bad? Leave it for humans to discuss. It depends. Does that person move you closer to Jesus or further away from Jesus? Then there's your answer. All that matters is, are you moving forward to love God, love people, and make disciples who make disciples? If not, it's a squirrel. It's a distraction. Jesus said, seek first his kingdom, God's kingdom, and his righteousness, God's righteousness. That should be the main thing. Okay? And most of us, I mean, no one wants to go into a new year like this and you know, post the truth for some of us, which it is, and that is like, hey, it's a new year. I'm focused on making the same mistakes as last year, last decade. That would be 100 for a lot of people, wouldn't it? Like, nobody wants to say that, so we have to come up with something that would be, oh man, spinning my wheels, hashtag insanity, hashtag fear is Lord, hashtag faith is too risky, hashtag Mo Squirrel. Like, that's the truth for a lot of us, and I just want to say, not because I think my sermons are awesome, but because I'm trying to say what Jesus has said to us, and that is a non-response to the sermon means spiritually, you will repeat the same spiritual mistakes again this year, again this decade. And we may lose you in this decade. So it is so important for you to say, my focus needs to be love God, love people, focus on Jesus, and make disciples who make disciples. One truth about me is this: I hate squirrels. I'm fully prepared to offend some people in this section, but I hate squirrels. I hate them. And one of the things that's funny, I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, grew up a Buckeye, fan of the Buckeyes, go Bosa. And I grew up, but we moved and lived to Washington, D.C. for a while, 8 years. And we came back, and I forgot how large the squirrels are in Ohio. They're huge. You go to other parts of the country in D.C., they're like squirrel size. Here, they're house cat size. And you don't know that until you move away and come back. You're like, what the friggity frick, man? Those are huge squirrels. Man, oh man. Like, I got wrestled to the ground in a park by a squirrel. So you're like, they're huge. But one time, we have this tradition where we carve a pumpkin. It's like a family thing we do at the dinner table, make a jack-o'-lantern out of it. You know, it's kind of common thing. Stick a candle in it, put it on our back porch. Well, one year when the kids were little, something ate the face out of our jack-o'-lantern. And it was a pumpkin with a hole in the front of it. I was like, what would do that? I was like, what demon exists in Garfield Heights that would eat the face out of a jack-o'-lantern that a family did together? That's unbelievable. Goblins show up, and I was really perplexed. Like, I had no idea what kind of creature was in our backyard. So we made another jack-o'-lantern, and we put it out on the back porch. And one day, rolling home in our minivan, my wife was driving. I was in the passenger seat because that's how we roll. She's driving. The kids are in the back. We're pulling into our back and see our deck, and there's a squirrel full-on making out with a jack-o'-lantern, like that bad kisser in middle school, just tearing the face off of this jack-o'-lantern. And I was like, The van hadn't even stopped yet. While it was rolling, I popped open the door. I jumped out. I mean, they call me white lightning. I'm fast. I flew over. That squirrel son was like, nah! Ran off the porch, and I ran through the backyard. We got a little backyard, but I scooped up a playground ball the kids had left out. That squirrel went up our back fence. I winged that ball at that squirrel. It went over the fence just in time, and that ball smashed into the fence. I was so close, and I was like, don't you ever come back. And since that moment that I know who's been messing with my jack-o'-lanterns, I hate squirrels. Like, I want to do this, and you can call PETA, you can call Katniss, I don't care who you call. But I hate squirrels. Now, kids, don't harm squirrels at home. But I secretly fantasize about becoming, if I could support my family by being a squirrel assassin, I would kill squirrels for a living and pay the fines. I would go in backyards with blow darts, camouflage, face painted. I would eliminate squirrels because I hate them. Last year, my dog Sully, my beautiful dog Sully, caught his first squirrel. I appreciate that a small percentage of you is clapping, because that squirrel made a mistake. It ran up a fence in our backyard. They don't usually come in our yard anymore because he's out there like, "Rrr." That picture, the ball. Come get my ball, I dare you. So squirrels don't even come in our backyard, but one did. And he was out on his lead. This squirrel went up the fence. My wife saw it with her own two eyes. The squirrel made a bad move. It jumped back into the yard over Sully, and Sully was like, jumped in the air, snagged it. Shannon, my wife, said, I heard a from the squirrel, and it went limp. And the squirrel lays on the ground, but Sully has no idea. He just wants to play. So the squirrel doesn't move anymore. He's like, well, that's boring. He nudges it a couple times. Okay. He just walks away. He's done or whatever. Shannon calls me. She's like, there's a dead squirrel, and Sully did it. It was awful. I heard it. I saw it. Can you please come home and get rid of the dead squirrel? I'll come home, get rid of the dead squirrel. I came home, and I'm just being honest with you. In my heart, I was so happy. I was so proud of my dog. I was like, he's living my dream. He's a squirrel assassin. And I picked up that squirrel. Rigor mortis hadn't even set in yet. It was still flimsy. I put it in that trash bag. I threw it away, and I went in, and I said, good dog. Good dog. He's like, I don't know what I did, but I love you. I am encouraging you, metaphorically, to be a squirrel assassin. This week, this month, to be like, what is my squirrel? Identify and eliminate. It's going to take guts to eliminate. And this is really what separates people who become spiritually mature from people who spin their wheels and are stuck and are like, man, that's who I want to be. I want to be a part of something like that. But it comes down to the guts of being like, I'm going to eliminate it. It's become bigger than God or distraction from God. It's a hobby that became a God. It's a person that showed me affection. And to say, I'm going to eliminate it and say, God, why did you put me here? What's my why? Okay, I'm going after that why because you've answered the question. One squirrel assassin at Momentum is a guy named Adam Smith. He goes to Momentum Garfield Heights here. Look at that pretty face. More than a mother could love. I love it. That's a pretty face. He's a senior, 12th grader at Garfield Heights High School. He's 6'2", 250 pounds. Bottom line, he's large. He is large, okay? And so Adam played some high school football as an offensive lineman, as a D lineman, defensive tackle. And going into the football season, the fall of 2018, he shocked his friends by posting this on Instagram. He said, as many of you know, I truly have a love and passion for football. But my football career, he said, has come to the point where it's unhealthy. It started pushing me further and further from my relationship with God. I've decided to step down for a while and move on. I've decided to not be known as the big, tough football player, but more of a man of God. It truly does hurt to hang up the cleats, but it's for the better. I hope that I can still be the same person in your eyes, but instead of a football in hand, maybe a cross, LOL. Now, Adam told me that, it was just too hard for him to be godly while he was on the football team at that particular instance of his life because of all the distractions, the squirrels that were around him. He said like drugs and sex and just flat out immaturity, he said. And he told me, he said, I didn't just give up. I persevered a couple of years and tried to invite teammates to church and to unleash the student ministry, but things just kept getting worse. And he said, he was putting practice and workouts above church. He was too busy fantasizing about playing football and getting rich, which became this kind of self-destructive fantasy for him. And he said, I was living for that 10 seconds of applause that came when I would deliver a big hit. And that's what I was pushing for all week. And eventually Adam realized that he was worshiping the game instead of worshiping God. Now that is identifying and eliminating a squirrel. That dude is a squirrel assassin because it wasn't easy for him. It took guts, it took courage, and he even went public with it. That's like public accountability. I'm doing this. I can't turn back because I told you I'm doing it. And so it wasn't just a sacrifice, it was an investment into his relationship with God. And he has eyes locked on, here's number one purpose. Adam, be the first to tell you, I'm not a perfect person, but I'm trying to stay locked into, I got to love God, I got to love people, I got to make disciples who make disciples. And it reminds me of what a first century Christian named Paul wrote to his young disciple Timothy when he said this, it's found in Scripture. Don't let anyone look down on you because you're young, but set an example for all the believers in speech, in life, in love, in faith, and in purity. And the point of this is to say, Timothy, you might be young, but when you make a bold move for Jesus, people of all ages, it sets an example for all the believers. And adults look and are like, man, if a high school student can give up something that they love so much because they realize it's become a distraction between them and their main why in life, then man, I can make some of those kind of investments into my relationship with God also. A bold move to eliminate a squirrel. I want to close by showing you this picture and explaining this to you. I think this picture is fascinating. So this is a picture that looks like it's photoshopped. It looks fake, but it is absolutely 100% authentic. And it's this picture. It was taken November 20th, 1965. And it's at Mount Hermon Prep School in Massachusetts. So a prep school is like a high school that prepares you for college. And so here's the important details that you need to know about what's happening right here. Is that Mount Hermon is the home team. And their high school football team had a 17-game win streak over 2 years. And this was the last game of this season. And they were playing their bitter rivals, Deerfield, which was another prep school. And Mount Hermon was losing 20-0 before halftime. So this 2-year win streak is at stake, all right? And this big crowd shows up, a few thousand people. You can only see a chunk of them here, but there's a few thousand people because seriously, in this day and age and in that area, this was like the Steelers-Browns rivalry. It was like the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry, this big high school football game going on. Well, just before halftime, people noticed smoke coming from Silliman Hall, which was the science building on campus. And they noticed smoke coming from it, and so basically, the building had caught fire due to some faulty wiring, this they would find out later, but the game stopped. Firefighters came to battle the blaze, and at halftime, the referees huddled up, and they had a discussion. And in a decision that would never be made in 2020, they decided the game must go on. And they continued the football game. Now, you're going to read articles, you can look it up because this is all true, and you'll read people who downplay it like, oh no, they told people that they couldn't help. People weren't allowed to help or whatever. This is not true, and you hear it from the players and the coaches who have been interviewed about this game and this day. There was James Van Fleet, who was number 64 for Mount Hermon at the time, and he said in a very recent article, we were told to suck it up and play. And so they go back to playing after halftime. Meanwhile, volunteers formed a bucket brigade to remove items and animals. And they couldn't do it fast enough, so the building burned down and tons of stuff was lost and ruined. Science things and taxidermy and all this kind of stuff that was in there. So that day, Mount Hermon lost the game, a 2-year win streak, and their science building. Because they did rally in the second half, but they still ended up losing 20-14. Well, there was a school parent that was there who had a camera and decided this is an interesting photo op. So they come over to this side of the field, or maybe there's a crowd over here, and they take this picture where you can see people's eyes glued on the field, and some of the people in the back row are turning around watching the fire being put out. But basically, one writer said, this is a perfect symbol for educational priorities in America. Think about that. And so a school parent takes this picture and these people's eyes glued to the field while this is burning behind them. And I think one of the most honest quotes came from the visiting team's coach, Coach Jim Smith. In a 2015 interview, he said this. He said, it was one of the most memorable games of my 36-year career. It was so exciting that nobody wanted to stop the game. And that was the number one thing in my mind. Basically, forget the fire. There's a football game to be played. Forget that this building's going to burn down and all this stuff will be lost. We've got to finish this game. And here's the point. There is something urgent. Your why, what you were created for, what you were created to do, to love God, love people, and make disciples who make disciples. But if you're anything like me, it is so easy, year to year, month to month, week to week, to start gluing your eyes on something else that's a distraction. And so much will be lost if you do that. So much will be lost if you glue your eyes on the wrong thing and you don't turn and walk away from that thing and focus on the thing that should be focused on. Identify and eliminate the squirrels. So we're going to end this message by doing something interactive for anyone who wants to contribute. I want to invite you during the next 2 worship songs, anytime during these 2 worship songs, to come on down front and you can grab a paper squirrel. They're all along here, the edge of the stage, this side of the stage, and some Sharpies, and to take a paper squirrel and to write down, I know what my squirrel is, and to write down what is your distraction. If you got 2 or 3 that come to mind, feel free to write down whatever you want and then just drop them in this galvanized bucket right here. It might be a name that you write down, or girlfriend, or it might be a bad habit, an addiction, a bad priority. It might be a hobby that's become a god. Put it in the bucket, and that represents a declaration to God to say, okay, I identify my squirrel, and now, beginning Sunday afternoon, I got to start working with and wrestling with how to eliminate that distraction or reprioritize it so it's below love God, love people, and seek Jesus first. Let's do that as we sing.